Prayers offered by the member for Savannah.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name, and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of the opposition, ministers of the cabinet, ex officio members and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen. And as King David said in Psalm 119, pray for peace in Jerusalem.
Administration of oaths and affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
Only that I have been notified of late arrivals because of other official duties of the Honourable Minister of Financial Services and Councillor Captain Eugene E. Banks.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. Plan and estimates for 2018-19 financial year. Budget statements, ownership agreements, and purchase agreements for 2018 and 2019 financial years, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, colleagues, and thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Government, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the finalised 2018 and 2019 budget documents.
So ordered. Is the Minister speaking there too?
Briefly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Section 22 of the Public Management and Finance Law, the Government is required to finalise its 4 budget documents that consist of budget statements, purchase agreements, ownership agreements, and plan and estimates. These 4 finalised documents have just been tabled. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the initial budget documents with respect to the 2018 and 2019 financial years were tabled in this Honourable House on the 27th of October 2017. Since then, the budget documents have been updated to correct typographical errors and to provide enhanced information resulting from Finance Committee review and scrutiny process. Furthermore, the documents have been signed by the relevant parties, including Honourable Ministers, Chief Officers, statutory authorities, government-owned companies, and non-government output suppliers. Mr. Speaker, copies of the finalised 2018 and 2019 budgets are available on the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development's website, www.mof.gov.ky. Additionally, the finalised budget documents will be emailed to all honourable members as opposed to printing and binding hard copies of the documents in order to save approximately 2,900 pages it would take to print one set of the 4 budget documents. Multiplied by 19, this will save almost 55,000 pages. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, if there are honourable members that wish hard copies of one or more of the documents, I ask that they let me know, and printed and bound copies will be produced for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Anti-Corruption Commission Annual Report, 1st of July 2016 to the 30th of June 2017, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Attorney General, ex officio member responsible for the portfolio of the legal affairs.
Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek leave of the House to lay on the table the Anti-Corruption Commission report for the period 1st July 2016, 30th of June 2017, along with an executive summary, especially as the latter relates to the enforcement of the law during this period.
The honourable member wish to speak there too.
Mr. Speaker, very briefly, with your leave, I wish to offer a brief overview of the executive summary of the report for the relevant period, 2016-2017, and that is being tabled pursuant to Section 53 of the Anti-Corruption Law. Mr. Speaker, that section requires the Attorney General and the Deputy Governor to prepare a report and for the AG to lay it on the table of the House. And so the basis of the executive summary, which deals mostly with the issue of the enforcement. Mr. Speaker, as members are aware, the Commission was created under the Anti-Corruption Law in 2008, came into effect in January 2010. The Commission is responsible for the administration of this law, including receiving, considering, and investigating reports to the Commission and allegation of corruption. They are also mandated, Mr. Speaker, to receive, including from overseas anti-corruption agencies, requests and to analyze and disseminate disclosures of information concerning corruption offences or suspected offences, also as required by the law. They are expected to detect and investigate suspected matters, including attempts, conspiracies to commit such offences. Mr. Speaker, in August last year, August 2016, the Governor appointed the following commissioners: Mr. Richard Coles as chairman, Mr. Norman Budden, Ms. Sophia Ann Harris, Ms. Katie or Mrs. Katie Pentney, and Mr. Timothy Ridley as commissioners. During the relevant period, Mr. Speaker, the reporting period, as it relates to the enforcement of the law, the Commission received 10 complaints or reports of corruption, conducted 54 interviews, arrested 11 persons, served 1 letter for production of documents, and submitted 6 reports to the Office of the DPP. At the end of the reporting period, the Commission was actively investigating 7 cases and had concluded 5 cases. 10 cases were transferred to other investigative units and was awaiting further information in addition to 8 cases. And they were awaiting further information in addition to, let me start that again. They were awaiting further information in respect of some 8 cases. Further, the Commission received 3 overseas requests for assistance, and in return, the Commission made 2 overseas requests on its own motion. Mr. Speaker, the Commission also entered into multilateral memorandum of understanding with the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority and other Cayman government agencies as part of the compliance with the Financial Action Task Force requirements. It also entered into separate MOUs with the RCIP, Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, and the Financial Reporting Authority in order to enhance cooperation and assistance between the entities, and thus further streamlining the interagency coordination and cooperation among domestic agencies. Mr. Speaker, the Commission has also revamped its website and engaged with numerous entities on both local and international levels to establish and foster greater working relationships and in furtherance of fulfilling its overall legislative mandate. The full report, Mr. Speaker, the 2016-27 annual report is attached along with the executive summary, and I encourage members of this House as well as the wider public to familiarize themselves with the contents of the summary and the report. Mr. Speaker, may I just say also that both the summary and the report will be available on the anti-corruption website. Thank you.
Questions to honourable ministers and members of the cabinet. The elected member from Northside. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing. Question number 6.
Elected member for Northside, the Honourable Opposition Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing the following question. Can the Honourable Minister give an update on the marking of the no-dive zones in Northside and the removal of the dive buoys within the no-dive zones?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Speaker. The answer to the member from Northside and Opposition Leader. Mr. Speaker, the no-dive zones in Northside remain unchanged from what was established in 1988, and there are no dive buoys located within those no-dive zones. The dive buoys that the member from Northside may be referring to are the buoys that mark 4 very popular internationally known tourism and scuba diving sites. These buoys are frequented by both fishing boats and diving boats and are available on a first-come, first-served basis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member supplementaries, the member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Speaker. Can the member say when the no-dive zones in Northside are going to be properly demarcated?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker. The DOE stands ready to do its part when it comes to marking the boundaries of the currently gazetted no-dive zones. However, as that process involves obtaining permissions from landowners, the planning department and most likely the National Roads Authority, the Ministry and the DOE would prefer to first resolve any misunderstandings about the current boundaries of the no-dive zones instead of going ahead and demarcating the zones as they are and then having to go through the process all over again a short time later. If the member for Northside and the government agrees that the boundaries are to be adjusted, then they would have to mark the buoys all over again.
Elected member for Northside.
Mr. Chairman, I crave your indulgence for 5 minutes, because this is getting really, 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 really ridiculous. These no-dive zones, as you will be aware, Mr. Speaker, were created in the legislation in 1986. They have never been properly demarcated. I understand the lobby for the diving, from the diving people and from the tourism industry, that they don't want these no-dive zones demarcated because they consistently continue to infringe the law. Nobody, I have never...
Say the consistent infringing law you're talking about. Just so that you...
The divers.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, we have two problems. We have the dive boats, the liveaboard dive boats, who consistently violate the zones. They use the buoy that is provided for them by DOE, and they tie the stern line onto the coral. They dive down and tie it onto the coral. The tourism facilities in the District of Eastern and Northside consistently send shore diving groups to dive in these zones. I can try not to use unparliamentary language, Mr. Speaker, but I am tempted. The DOE comes here consistently and misinforms the public. There is nothing in my question that talks about changing the dive zones. Why are they bringing it up? The only people that want to change the dive zones is the DOE and the dive industry. And it ain't going to happen on my watch. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, the minister at the time was given one banana story and one pile of rubbish by the DOE in answer to a question here, claiming I was trying to expand the dive zones. Nothing could be further from the truth. The DOE claims, and Mr. Speaker, the House and the country need to understand, when we created these dive zones in 1986, we never had no GPS, you know. We used shore landmarkers, which still exist today. The coconut tree at Cap Grape Tree was blown down Hurricane Ivan, but it was still in the bush when I took the officer from the DOE up there 2 years ago with his GPS to show him the lines.
I am allowing the member some latitude because of the matter it is. I know how important it is. I will ask the member to cut it short.
I don't have a problem, sir. I'll go through the questions. Can the minister say who made an application to change the zones and when was it made to the DOE?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there are no requesting.
The elected member for Northside.
Can the minister say then why in his answer he emphasized that the Northside dive zones remain unchanged?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I'm advised, the dive zones in Northside remain unchanged from what was established in 1988. And there are no dive buoys located within those no dive zones.
Elected member for Northside.
Mr. Speaker, can the minister say why the no-dive zones have not been demarcated, as I have requested of the government repeatedly?
The Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the DOE is aware of the member, the opposition leader's plight to have these marked. What the DOE is advising is that some of the areas that the member from Northside, the opposition leader, once marked has not been gazetted. If the House sees it fit to gazette these areas, then they have no problem in moving ahead and marking the entire area, or the cabinet, I guess.
Last question, elected member for Northside.
Well, since that's a lot, will the minister commit to this House to instruct the Department of the Environment to demarcate the dive zones as identified by me to them, to their officer, Mr. Orr, over 2 years ago, and place on each zone 3 markers? One on the roadside, so that the driving public will know where they can dive and they can't dive. One on the shoreline, and one at the drop-off. And commit that those buoys, which exists within the proper dive zones, whether as gazetted or not, they have the coordinates and they can re-gazette it. If that's what it takes, then re-gazette it, are removed promptly.
Honorable Minister.
Consider done.
You said I was the last question. Well, I could add on that I wanted time frame for it to be completed, but we'll negotiate that afterwards.
He can't make up to any.
Okay. No, I thought you had a supplementary question.
Premier, Honorable Premier, we have reached the hour. We have reached the hour. Would you offer suspension of 10-2 to allow us to go past the hour? So 20, yes.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 22, 7, and 8 in order that questions may be taken after the hour of 11 o'clock.
Thank you. The question is that Standing Order be suspended to allow us to go past the hour of 11 a.m. All in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
The elected member for Northside to ask the Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing. Question number 7.
The elected member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to ask Honourable Minister of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing, can the Honourable Member explain the process followed for the tendering of the solid waste management for the Cayman Islands?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture and Housing adhered to the guidelines and the framework for fiscal responsibility and tendering process. The Integrated Solid Waste Management, or ISWIMS, Steering Committee deemed that solid waste in Cayman would be best managed through a public-private partnership. An outline business case produced by the UK-based company determined that the design, build, finance, operate and maintain contract for the PPP arrangement would offer the best value for money. The ministry advertised the request for pre-qualification via a local media house on the Central Tenders Committee website and as per CTC requirements. Cabinet then instructed the ministry along with the Department for Environmental Health to move forward with procurement of the ISWIMs based on a competitive dialogue process. The reference project developed by ISWIMS includes waste management system components that provide an ultimate aim of reducing the amount of waste going into the landfill by up to 95% from current landfill amounts. And it also includes the future remediation or closing of the 3 existing online landfills on all 3 islands. After the competitive dialogue process, a preferred bidder and a reserve bidder were identified. The ministry is currently in negotiations with the preferred bidder to finalize a number of technical, financial, and legal details before a contract can be entered into. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The elected member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the minister say how many companies or entities responded to the request for pre-qualification and how many were pre-qualified?
Mr. Speaker, a total of 35 companies collected the pre-qualification documents. Of those, only 7 submitted pre-qualification documents.
Elected member for Northside.
Can the minister say
supplementaries?
how many of the 7 that actually submitted were pre-qualified?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there was specific pass-fail criteria on technical and financial criteria in the PQQ document, and 3 of the submissions failed on not providing the mandatory 3 reference plants, and 1 of the submissions failed on not providing the required project financing and the 3 reference plants. Mr. Speaker, in total, 2 Cayman-based companies submitted a PQQ document. Of the 3 bidders, 1 withdrew during the CD process at the ISOS stage, and as a result, 2 bidders submitted final tenders, one of which was identified as the preferred bidder and the other as the reserved bidder.
Elected member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, can the minister say if the preferred bidder, who is now involved in the competitive dialogue process, represents a combination of any companies that pre-qualified?
Honorable Minister.
No, they don't.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us on what authority did Cabinet instruct the ministry to go into competitive dialogue?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can... Mr. Speaker, if I'm allowed, what I can tell the member is that the competitive dialogue comprises of the following stages. The pre-qualification interested bidders were given an opportunity to collect and complete a questionnaire to determine eligibility, completed on the 28th of October to the 2nd of December 2016. Invitation to participate in the dialogue, invitation to submit outline solutions. After the ministry's departmental tender review team evaluated the PQQ documents, applicants were invited to participate in this stage on the 22nd of December 2016 to the 10th of February 2017. Invitation to submit final tenders after the first round of dialogue meetings, at which time bidders sought clarification on aspects of the project. They were allowed to reevaluate solutions and present a final tender on the 24th of February to the 19th of April 2017. Appointment of a preferred bidder and a reserved bidder was on the 14th of September 2017, and the preferred bidder negotiation and contract award on October 2017 to October 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us what is the purpose of the reserve bidder at this stage?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the reserve bidder is in case talks break down with the preferred bidder, then we can go right back to the reserve bidder without having to go back out to tender.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister says this was done in adherence to the guidelines in the framework for fiscal responsibility in tendering process. And it was also decided that it should be through PPP, private partner, public-private partner tendership, relationship, PPP. Now, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us how we can reach 2 bidders pre-qualified and we immediately go into competitive dialogue with one under the FFR and the public management law as well.
Honorable Minister. We are allowing time for the minister to converse with his officer.
Mr. Speaker, the member spoke about the competitive dialogue process. The competitive dialogue has been used with all the bidders, and this is an accepted procurement method used globally and effective with PPP projects. What we are actually in now is contract negotiations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To give you notice, you'll have one more supplementary after this,
Okay.
if you're choosing.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, the substantive answer does not explain to this Honorable House how we arrived at the preferred bidder. Did we go through the process and eliminate all others and then went in to value engineering, value engineering or cost value? So we break it down to, did we break it down to one bidder with the lesser, who had the lesser of the shortcomings, and that was the preferred one? Did we do that? Because this substantive answer does not say that. It says Cabinet instructed to go in to competitive dialogue.
No.
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I want to clarify is that Cabinet gave approval to move forward with the procurement and the dialogue. But what I must say is that the preferred bidder was the highest scoring bidder. The solution is closely aligned with the financial estimates presented in the ISWIM's outline business case. It met all the minimum threshold scores for the technical, financial, and legal sections of the bid, and the solution is deliverable. Mr. Speaker, the period for the appointment to award the contract for the ISWIM project is the final stage of the procurement process, which is estimated to take about 9 months or longer to complete. The final tender will form the basis on which the Cayman Islands government and the preferred bidder are prepared to contract with each other, and the preferred bidder will not be permitted to materially modify any aspects of the final tender other than in relation to the finalization and the agreement of the reserved matters. Designation of a preferred bidder is not a contract award. Once the contract negotiations regarding the reserved matters have been completed and agreed, the final contract will be prepared and awarded through the Central Tenders Committee process.
I understand, Mr. Speaker, but it gets more convoluted as we go on. Mr. Speaker, my concern is that the minister is saying that the final tender, what is there to tender again? That I don't understand. We tendered it for pre-qualifications. We got 7. 4 did not qualify. 1 dropped out. We had 2 left, as I understand it. One of them had to win the pre-qualifications. Are we working with both, or are we just working with the, because the answer was the secondary one would be if the first one failed. What are we going back out tender for? We getting them to help us with it, with the actual tendering process, which then has to go back out, and then we have to then CDC through CDC, CTC.
It just don't make sense. Honorable Minister. If it's going to be awarded through CTC. And that's what competitive dialogue, that's what already from the person. You don't need to tender it again. You have all the identified persons, so you need to change.
Mr. Speaker, the question from the member from East End. This process will not be going back out to tender.
Next question.
Mr. Speaker, I had a question.
I did say that was the last supplementary, and I believe we have covered a lot of ground on it. I move to the next question.
Mr. Speaker, I thought you were telling the member from East End that was his last, because the other members.
I'm sorry that you thought that.
So
we move to the next question.
The elected member for East End to ask Honourable Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure. Question number 8.
The elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence, sir. I submitted 2 separate questions in this instance because they are 2 separate and distinct matters. I will not be able to get the supplementaries in on both. And, Mr. Speaker, as you well know, these things are done for specific reasons. Now, would someone tell me, if I'm asking a question of a minister, should I do each question on separate sheets? Not because they're related to East End, but they need to be two separate questions.
I'm sorry, what are you referring to?
The question 8. They need to be two separate questions.
But, Honorable Member, I see no reason why that this question can't be answered and can't be put as the way it is. It affects the East End Primary School and the two separate places. Nevertheless, it's not that much of a difference, and certainly your supplementaries would show that.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier asked if I submitted two separate questions. I wonder if he wants a copy of it. Okay. But I want to be guided now by your good self, Mr. Speaker, as to how we submit questions, because if I submit to one minister and I only have two questions for that minister, should I put them on two separate papers? Because what has happened is that it appears like we have now gone to a different thing where we're joining the questions together. Because I had another one that I saw as well that was joined.
For the sake of time and efficiencies, I see no reason why, while the standing order is quite clear about how questions are asked, when they're asked, how they get on the order paper. I can't see any big fuss when the question is asked about repairs, upgrades to the William Allen McLaughlin Civic Center in East End be completed, and when will the standby generator for the East End School be commissioned and put in service. It's not that much of a difference. And for efficiency's sake, the legislative offices can take the necessary steps so that we have that efficiency if members don't ramble on too long.
Mr. Speaker?
So, just a minute. If you are asking my opinion, Honorable Member from East End, I think you have latitude, even though the two are together, to get your answers.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you if that's what you're going to allow me.
I will love the normal latitude so that you can ask your questions and the minister can answer them.
Mr. Speaker, certainly the Parliament, the staff has the right to look at efficiency, but Mr. Speaker, the convention is that I am notified too. And I was not notified that we would join in these because I would have objected to it. Mr. Speaker.
And I should just say, perhaps it was not the staff, it could have been the ministry that submitted their answers together.
Mr. Speaker, just to chime in quickly.
Elected member for Newlands.
If we're going to go through that process of combining the questions, I note that you have been very strict with supplementaries. That is going to disadvantage the members on this side because you may limit them to 4 supplementaries, whereas if it's 2 separate questions, it would be 8. So, you know, in the interest of the opposition having its say, I think that, you know, the way that we submit the questions is the way they should be presented.
Perhaps the way you submit is not is not the way that saves the time. And as I said, I will give the normal latitude, but we must understand too that the Assembly, staff, and the Ministry wants to save time. Today being Thursday, you all should be very satisfied with saving time. You've got a lot of private members' motions to deal with.
Mr. Speaker, Mike?
Your turn now.
Well, I am glad to hear that we try and save time in here. Somehow. Mr. Speaker, question number 8, which is 2 questions. Can ask of the Minister responsible for works. Can the Honourable Minister say when will the repairs and repairs upgrades to the William Allen McLaughlin Civic Centre in East End be completed? And question number 2, when will the standby generator for the East End Primary School be commissioned and put in service?
The Honourable Minister for Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank the member for the question. Addressing the William Allen McLaughlin Civic Centre issues first, and as I undertook with the member when we visited East End, that we were going to get these repairs done, we anticipate that all of the repairs and or upgrades would be completed by June 30th, 2018. Let me expand on the details a little bit, Mr. Speaker. Public Works Department has informed us that the repairs to the cistern are being undertaken first and should be completed by the end of March. However, Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, parts for the generator are being ordered and estimated to arrive around mid-April. All goes well, Mr. Speaker, the genset will be repaired by mid-April. Mr. Speaker, I've also been informed by our facilities management that other repairs have been tendered and will commence on the 1st of May 2018. It is anticipated that these upgrades will be complete by 30th of June 2018. Mr. Speaker, I should note that FM anticipates that the hall will be operational and ready for the hurricane season, with only minor cosmetic upgrades being undertaken, finalized during the month of June. Mr. Speaker, addressing the second part of the question, the standby generator for the East End Primary School should be commissioned and put in service by around mid to end of May 2018. To expand on this a little, Mr. Speaker, we have signed the contract to purchase a part, and barring any unforeseen difficulties, the company has informed us that the delivery of the part, along with completion, should take about 6 weeks.
Elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Now, if I should help guide you, since there was so much commotion about the way the question was answered, you should don't double up your supplementaries. Ask one at a time. I'll do the same thing. Elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your sage advice, but you know I've been down this block before.
Not as long as me, but
not as long as you, but I know it too, though. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister on the William Allen McLaughlin Civic Centre if he is aware of the schedule that was sent out sometime in 2015-16.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Minister.
I am unaware, or I do not recall seeing that schedule, sir.
Elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will tell the Premier what it has to do with the price of eggs. Which one comes first, the eggs or the chickens? Well, you stop commenting over there, Mr. Premier. Mr. Speaker, the kitchen in the Civic Center East End has been outstanding since early 2013. The issue of the repairs and the upgrade to the kitchen has been outstanding since 2013. For instance, we're now in the 3rd month of this year. March to April, this year alone, we were supposed to have ordered the kitchen. The minister has now said it's not going to be finished till June 30th. The schedule does not say that. Anyway, I shall hold the minister to that. As I keep paper, ask the Premier if I don't. The gen set has been outstanding 3 years, the repairs on it. I offered to go with them to show them how to clean it, and they went and called me after the fact. The cistern has been, the leaks, has been outstanding since Hurricane I-1 2000, September the 10th, 2004. The air condition has been outstanding since September the 10th, 2004. The leak on the air condition, and it remains. The flooring has been outstanding for as long. Has the minister had any representation on those aspects of it, like the flooring, as to when that will be completed and the repairs on the roof?
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can only answer the minister since June 2017, sir. But what I do have, and I undertook, and I did visit, and I agree with the member that those works were desperately needed. The kitchen, the list of things that I have here, Mr. Speaker, has been repaired and replaced. The kitchen, 6-burner gas range oven, 2-compartment sink, 3-compartment sink, adjustable wall faucet, hand sink with drain and faucet, grease interceptor, stainless steel tables with undershelf, commercial exhaust hood with an Ansel fire suppression system, refrigerators, 2-door bottom freezer with ice maker, wall shelves, a central AC unit, a kit for the kitchen and a small office, a 3-ton unit for the kitchen and a small office, anodized bypass windows, tempered glass for the pass-through, quartz countertop, porcelain floor tiles, propane gas works, plumbing works, electrical works, and kitchen cabinets. I have seen the plans and the schedule of equipment myself, and I undertake to the minister to continue to track the progress on the project, Mr. Speaker, to the member to track the progress.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister says that he can only talk about since May 2017, June 2017. Well, you shouldn't have taken on the constitutional responsibility for all those behind you. That includes me. Absolutely, that includes me. So those who snickering over there, you tell them you got a constitutional responsibility, not me. You stay out of it, Premier.
Mr.
Elected
Speaker.
member for East End.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, thank you. That's your little fellow there making noise. Mr. Speaker, I guess I will have to satisfy with that. But the minister knows I'm not trying to embarrass him, but it's about time it came on the floor so the public knows that I was doing my job. Since 2013, they wouldn't do it. Mr. Speaker, I would like to now turn to the East End Primary School generator. Why has it taken so long to get this commissioned and put in service?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, may I have a moment to confer?
Certainly.
Mr. Speaker, thank the member for the question. As memory serves and have been informed, there was some issues with the lead agency on the generator. We have resolved that. I remember dealing with that very early in my tenure. That has been resolved. My understanding is that parts were ordered and the part arrived wrong, and we have reordered the parts again.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know I don't want to put the minister on the spot, but this is the third time parts has been ordered for this generator. And they get them wrong every time. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us that. No, that's why I'm hesitant, because he is collateral damage. That's what's happening with him. I don't even want to. I just gotta leave it, because it's becoming frustrating. I helped us save $60,000 on the installation of that generator, Mr. Speaker, when I asked them to relocate it so they didn't have to do all the rubbish that they were doing. And we're a year and more and it's still not commissioned? It's not the minister's fault. And then when we get to the next question, it's not the minister's fault either.
Elected member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I would just see if I could ask the minister responsible for facilities management if he would undertake to ensure that the bundle of rust that is beside the Craddock Bank Civic Center that used to be a fuel tank would be removed before the hurricane season starts, because it does a potential problem in a hurricane.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Let me undertake first, Mr. Speaker, to the member from East End to get an update on some timelines on the gen set. And to the member from Northside, I'm very much aware of that tank and the one at the East End Civic Center as well. Both need to be moved, and I'll take an undertaking to follow up on that. Thank you.
The elected member for East End to ask the Honourable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs, question number 9.
The Honorable Member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, question number 9 is asked of the Honorable Premier. Can the Honorable Minister say what is the government doing to address the growing issue of employers requiring born Caymanians to have a letter from Immigration Department acknowledging that they are Caymanians?
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the answer. In order to protect against the risk of committing an immigration offense, employers must satisfy themselves as to whether a prospective employee is or is not a Caymanian. A non-Caymanian obviously would require a work permit. In many cases, this verification process is easy, where a person is Caymanian through the grant of that right by the Caymanian Status and Permanent Residency Board or by the Cabinet. He or she is issued a certificate stating that they are Caymanian. In other instances where a person is Caymanian as of right or by entitlement, the Chief Immigration Officer is entrusted under immigration legislation with authority to validate and confirm in writing that the person is Caymanian. The exercise of producing the relevant documents for this validation process results in the issuance of a letter that serves as proof for all purposes that the individual is indeed Caymanian. An endorsement to this effect is also to be placed in the Caymanian's passport. The government recognizes, however, Mr. Speaker, the difficulties that some Caymanians experience in proving their immigration status, especially when they only need to do so for the first time later in life. Given such challenges, the government is committed to finding a viable solution to this decades-old problem. To this end, the legislation and administrative process for seeking an acknowledgement from the Chief Immigration Officer that a person is Caymanian is being examined as part of work currently being undertaken to establish the National Human Resources Department.
Elected Member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a number of questions, but the first one is how the Premier says that the government is committed to looking into this legislation and administrative process. Can he give us a time frame on it?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, not with any exactitude, because we are looking at a whole range of necessary changes to the immigration legislation. This one is very difficult. I personally have spent a lot of time discussing how we go about it. And to understand how difficult it is, you have to appreciate that Cayman is one of those unique countries where merely birth in the jurisdiction does not confer Caymanian status. So you can't, as in other places, simply rely on the birth certificate. You cannot also rely on the passport, because there are people who have the Cayman passport who don't have Caymanian status. So we have to try to devise a means of easily and simply being able to determine the status of a person. There is a process, but the process is what the member is complaining about, because the process is involved and it takes time and you have to go and procure documents. Indeed, as I've said in this house before, when my elder son obtained a job at Maples and Calder, he had to go through the same process, and he had to get a letter from the chief immigration officer based on my birth certificate, his mother's birth certificate, his birth in the Cayman Islands, all of those things. So I am personally aware of what's involved. We are trying to look at this both in the immediate and the longer term. In the longer term, for the generations to come, the obvious way to do this is to coordinate the registration processes so that when there is a live birth in the Cayman Islands, that you require, this is a possible way of doing it, that's not the case now, just so people understand, to require that when the birth is registered, the proof of citizenship is then determined so that the birth certificate thereafter would be proof positive one way or the other as to whether or not that person is Caymanian as of right. So all of these various things are being looked at, but the answer is not simple or straightforward. Otherwise, I'm sure many before me and this government would have done it.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know the difficulties that this is presented to us, but it is extremely important that we work on it as fast as possible. During our the PPM tenure, the real PPM tenure, in the government, our backbench colleague, Mr. Alfonso Wright, brought a motion on national ID, and I believe that is the solution, because whilst the chief immigration officer is tasked with the responsibility and law to do this acknowledgement, he or she requires you to produce certain documentation, which is birth certificates. And the status of children law specifically says you are the child of your natural parents. And once you get the birth certificate of your natural parents, then you are that child. So anyone who was born here and registered who was not born of Caymanian heritage, the birth certificate will show that they are not of this country. Because if the parents were born overseas, that birth certificate says overseas, that's when the questions must start. That's when the question must start being asked. That's correct. So it's as convoluted and difficult as we think it is, there is an answer of bringing all these together, like the Premier said, and making one ID. And on the front, our picture, like the driver's license, and one question: are you Caymanian? Yes or no? If it's ticked yes, that's it. If it's no, turn over, work permit, residence, or whatever. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that, because no matter how much a premier you are, you can have those of us others can think too, you know. Mr. Speaker, it begs the question, when we see Caymanians who have lived here all their lives, born of Caymanian parents, have to go through this, it's demoralizing. It really gets to the people. And it removes that sense of value from all of us. I got to get to your question.
Get to the question now.
Okay, okay. Sir.
You've said what you thought.
Mr. Speaker, whilst the Premier says he cannot give us any timeline, is there anything in the interim the government can do, like issuing a statement to affect some of what I just said about you're recognized as a Caymanian if these things are in place? And that will remove some of the problems we're having.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the other side of this is that if careful scrutiny of people who are applying for jobs is not done, we will wind up with persons who are not entitled to work in Cayman without a work permit actually working. We have a number of instances of that having occurred, but that I am aware of personally, but I've never thought that those instances which I've had to deal with were problematic because they related to people who had been here for long periods of time, some of them even born here, but they just had not, the so-called ghost Caymanians kind of situation. So I've never thought that was particularly unjust or doing Caymanians a disservice. But we have to ensure that the people who are able to just walk in to a job without a work permit are actually Caymanians. Otherwise, so that's the other side of this particular issue. What we have to try to resolve in the shorter term is the process by which you can obtain this necessary proof of being Caymanian. And in some cases, I accept that process takes too long. Because at the moment, it's only the Chief Immigration Officer that is charged with the responsibility of issuing these, what are effectively certificates, that he is satisfied that the person has Caymanian status. So this is the balancing act that we are going through now. And as I say, the effort is to try to improve the process and the timeliness of being able to issue these letters. But we can't do away with the requirement, otherwise we are really opening the door for people who aren't entitled to work in Cayman without a work permit, being able to do so.
Elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
your last supplementary.
Again, and it's my question. Mr. Speaker, I hear the Premier, but because it's not definitive, there can be some review of it done. Can the Premier say whether or not he thinks a review of it can be done? Because there are a number of people that can be eliminated. My children, your children, what have you, you and I can be eliminated from that requirement by virtue of birth certificate and your parents' birth certificate that we are. Yeah, you understand that?
Question, please.
Because, Mr. Speaker, the T&D does not require an acknowledgement. Government does not require, they want a birth certificate to define Caymanians. So I'm wondering if there isn't any way we can eliminate a lot of those, and then in the interim, that is. And it would go a long way in making Caymanians feel a little bit better.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure I can add any more to what I've already said. As I said, we're looking to see how the process can be improved. But in the end, the objective is to ensure, as I've said before, that the people who are working in Cayman without the need for immigration control are truly Caymanian. Otherwise, we exacerbate what is already a problem on the other end, which that honorable member and many other members complain about bitterly. That is Caymanians being disadvantaged in the job market.
You stop making excuses.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Don't want to do anything for Cayman. No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you, I hope you give me the latitude as you gave the favorable member from East End. He's favorable to me.
Not unfavorable.
Mr. Speaker, I think ultimately one thing that the Premier can and should be able to give us is that at least their commitment that through this administration, that at the end of this administration, this matter will be resolved. Because the fact that he hasn't given no timeline is just sufficiently not enough. Are we talking about 20 years, 50 years, 2 months, 1 year? There has to be a timeline. You can't say you can't give a timeline. Give at least the commitment to the end of this term. But I would like to I'll do my 2 questions in one, because I have to. I think the member from East End has a legitimate point that the major concerns that we have for those persons who are problematic in respect to whether they're Caymanian or not, that they could have been born here, but they're still not Caymanian, they have a passport, but they're still not Caymanian, that percentage, I think, is minuscule, possibly in the tens of percent. And what the elected member from East End is just suggesting is that even if it's a mere matter of process where the employer can call the immigration department with a name to say, can you give me a confirmation by email that this person is Caymanian? And that could cover 90% of them. It is not easy, particularly for members of Georgetown Central.
Do you have a question?
I'm going to put the question now, Mr. Speaker.
You please turn that into a question.
Can the Premier then say whether is there an easy process for those other 90% of Caymanians who really, truly, a birth certificate can do the job, that maybe by way of a phone call with a name to the immigration department to make the process easier? I must say that I see that the Premier is totally understanding of the issue and he understands the complexity, but a commitment and some early relief is what we're asking for from the elected member of East End. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it appears I have entirely failed in my explanation. There is no simple answer to this, otherwise it would have been in place a long time ago. It is not satisfactory to simply call the immigration department and ask them if a person is Caymanian, because the immigration office has no record of Caymanian births. The immigration, this is one of our big issues in terms of lack of data and the way information is kept. The immigration department has on record all the people who have applied for work permits, been granted work permits, who have applied for status or permanent residency. But those of us who are Caymanian as of right, there are no records with respect to us at immigration. So the chief immigration officer, to be able to issue anything like a certificate, has to be satisfied that the child is a child. This is talking about people as of right. The child is a child of a Caymanian. And the only way he can determine that is if you prove to him that that's the case. Hence, the need for birth certificates of the parents. So it is not simple or straightforward. Believe you me, not only do I understand the problem, but I am very empathetic about it. I get the same representations, and as I gave the example of my own son, the former minister, well, we have another one here, the former minister, Kurt Tibbetts, he had to apply to have his status acknowledged before he could run. So did the current deputy premier. Believe you me, we understand the issue. Believe you me, we understand the issue. But it is a result of a range of things. The fact is that there is no such thing as Caymanian citizenship. So what we have is a status. Because we are a British overseas territory, we are British citizens. Then we have, as I explained before, the fact that because you're born in Cayman, does not automatically confer upon you Caymanian status, which is the case in many other countries. And even if you have a Caymanian passport, that doesn't mean you're Caymanian either. So it is very difficult, without proving through all of these pieces of paper that you're actually Caymanian. That's the magic that we have to do. That's what we have to figure out. Because I know how Caymanians feel about it, because I feel the same way myself.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize, but the Premier did not answer the first initial question, which is, at the very least, a commitment that it will be addressed and fixed, at least by the end of this administration.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I did say in the very start of the answer that we are working on it now. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I have misplaced my magic wand. I'm still looking for it. If I can find it, I can wave it and we can fix it, and I can be able to give the member that undertaking.
The elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I may have even forgotten my question. No, there's a similar problem that while we're on this subject, that I would like to bring up, which is the requirement some employers are placing on Caymanian applicants to provide a bank reference. Now, I don't know for what purpose that is, and I'm not sure if that's even a requirement of the law. But while he's looking at these issues, this is one that he could hopefully add to his list and provide some clarity on.
Honorable Premier.
A bit out with the terms of this question, but I'm prepared to do so.
Mr. Speaker, one last question.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Premier saying that this problem cannot be resolved within the next 3 years in 2 months?
Honorable Premier.
That may be the view, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, of the member, but I don't think there are any problems that can't be solved. They just require care, attention, and thought, not magic to get them done.
So, Mr. Speaker, is he then committing to having it resolved by the end of his term?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I shall do as I have endeavored to do these almost past 18 years, do my very best to get it resolved.
The elected member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you, sir. And I think this question, even though directed at the Premier, the answer, I think, would be more in line for something for the public. One of the beliefs has always been that the voter IDs should actually qualify, because the only persons who can actually vote are Caymanians. But I understand, I think years gone by, I think people here prior to maybe 1981 would have probably had a voter ID or something and not necessarily be Caymanian, but that should be very far and few in between. So I think from the public standpoint, I mean, what would be the shortcomings or the limitations from having or using a voter ID as a form of proof that you're a Caymanian?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that is a good point. Very good point. Although there are a few, we found out a few who are still on the register that aren't or who aren't Caymanian. The number is very, very small. But the thing is that to get the voter's ID, you've still got to do all of the things that we're talking about now to get the letter from the Chief Immigration Officer. So if you get it done once, you should be okay. But at the present, you still got to go through essentially the same process to get there.
The next question.
The elected member for East End to ask the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands. Question number 10.
The elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, question number 10 is asked of the Minister for Sports. Can the Honourable Minister say when will the running, walk, and track be completed around the Donovan Rankin football field in East End?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The answer: the project is planned to commence at the end of May 2018. Project is expected to take 6 weeks to completion. Thus, the estimated completion date would be mid-July 2018.
The elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister can tell us the reason why it was not done in accordance with what we were told that the monies was available to be done in the last fiscal year.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike the representatives from West Bay who agreed for the track and will be getting a track this year, my staff have informed me that the honourable member from Easton did not agree with the plans for Easton, hence the delay with the completion.
The elected member for Easton.
Mr. Speaker, I will not allow the staff to tell the minister a lie on me. I will not allow that, okay? Because I visited with the chief officer and Mr. England and Public Works Department, and because it was in the middle of the field, I objected to it. We subsequently visited, and they said it was going to be 10 feet between the edge of it and the track, the football field and the track. And Darrell Rankin and I were there, and this was done in October last year. And it was to be done before the end of December in that fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, these civil servants are neither civil nor servient. It's obvious. And they must not tell the minister lies and put her on the spot.
Are you asking a question, or were you asking for permission
Mr. Speaker,
to
I want
clarify?
to know, when was the revised drawing sent to the ministry from Public Works?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, might I beg indulgence to further consult?
Certainly.
Mr. Speaker, I am informed by my technical staff that it was somewhere around the 12th of December. Persons would appreciate that that's the festive Christmas season and the close down for most departments, mentally, physically, and otherwise. It's also the close of the financial year. But I can say categorically that I have been informed, and so that I won't risk being economical with the truth, I'll read exactly what I was informed. Due to the concerns raised by the MLA McLean, which in parliamentary terms is the member responsible for the District of Easton, regarding the size of the football field, change was made to the design to maximize the area. The track layout was made wider and longer in order to increase the space in between the field and the track. The sprinkler system and the feeder boxes that are located at the edge of the field were also adjusted to accommodate the new track layout. So, Mr. Speaker, I think the record will reflect that the technical staff has been working with the member from Easton to carry out the more desirous wants of the minister for his district. And we're not saying that the minister did not, the member is not one who is an avid worker for the district, but the member, having been a minister already, realized that you have to rely on third-party agencies to carry out the work. And he also understands the fiscal year and the constraints that we have.
Elected member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, When I found out about that track, it was June, July last year. It was in the middle of the football field. Seriously reducing it. I made representation not to put the track there. I did that. The next time, after much trying to get in contact with them, was in October.
Are you going to turn, Honourable Member, are you going to turn it into a question?
No, but Mr. Speaker, I appreciate you asking me that, sir. But these people got to stop lying, man. You cannot be lying because she said that it was because of me. Why it wasn't in the initially?
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Honourable Minister.
I made it abundantly clear that I was reliably informed, and I wish the record to reflect that I have not misled this House, neither was I economical of the truth. So I would kindly ask my friend and colleague from Easton to make that clear in his utterances.
Mr. Speaker, I was getting to that. From the information she got, it misled this House, but she got the information. That's the only thing she can bring to the House, is what she got. That's what she can bring. It's not originating from the minister.
Honourable Member.
And Mr.
Please, the constant charge of civil servant lying is a very serious statement in this legislative assembly. And if you choose to clear yourself, which you have every right to do, there are times for personal explanations, which will speak directly to that point and nothing else. But I would ask you to, if you have a question, ask the question and not to carry on in that vein.
Mr. Speaker, I understand what you're saying, sir. But you will appreciate by the time I get to do a personal statement, this thing will have been into the community and it make me look like a liar. You can appreciate that.
I do, but if you want to explain and you think it is that urgent, mind you, that's how the rules are, as you know, then I would seek the indulgence of the House and allow you to do it. But you can't do it in question time. And the charge of anyone lying, a member or a civil servant, is a serious charge and even unparliamentary. I ask you to bear in mind those rules.
If they need me to say mendacious or economical with the truth, I don't care. But my name will not be soiled by someone else. I will not allow that to happen. More importantly, they made the minister now get into this controversy. Mr. Speaker, I followed up on this thing religiously. Every couple of days, every week, I was calling Public Works.
An honourable member, I think the minister herself indicated your work and your representation. I'm asking you, though, it is question time, and you know, well, stick to the rules.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to lead this into a question based on what the supplementary answer that I got. I followed up on this on a weekly basis with Public Works and with the ministry. And the minister says now that it was the 12th of December, I believe, in the supplementary answer, that it got back to the ministry. Why didn't it get back earlier when we met there in October and they said it was going to take 2 to 3 days to get the revised drawings done in order for it to be completed by December 31st?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm informed by my chief officer that the delay between what the minister has intimated to his Honourable House rests at the Public Works Department, and I'm not in a position to answer on behalf, as I'm not constitutionally responsible for that department.
Member for East End.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that, but can the minister say if the ministry was informed as to the cause of the delay?
Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm informed that due to the enormous amount of work and the prioritization that was there at Public Works, it fell within the slot that it fell within.
Mr. Speaker, this is my last supplementary on this, because I noticed the ministers, I didn't intend making her uncomfortable, but this is typical of public work. Everything you follow up with them on, it slipped through the crack. One house in East End slipped through the crack. Two, they was supposed to break it down for 2 years. That's a big crack.
The elected member for Bontown West to ask the Honourable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. Question number 11.
The member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, question number 11 standing in my name to the Honorable Premier. How many persons were recommended for deportation by the courts or recommended as prohibited immigrant by the Immigration Department since May 2013? And how many were actually approved by Cabinet? Did I read that correctly? Sorry, let me read it again, sorry. How many persons were recommended for deportation by the courts or recommended as prohibited immigrant by the Immigration Department since May 2013, and how many were actually approved by Cabinet? Thank you.
Honorable Minister, Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the answer. The Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration is working to compile the information requested, but it is taking longer than was realized because data is having to be collected from the courts, from the Immigration Department, and the Cabinet Office. Once all information is gathered, I would be happy, Mr. Speaker, to issue a written answer to the member.
The member for Bontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do recognize that it may take some time also because I was trying to research information. Just in terms of putting information together, I'd be appreciative if, while the ministry is compiling this information, if they can also give us the sections in terms, or the types, in terms of broken down, like for those whose statuses were revoked, like the classes of statuses, whether they were by marriage or by tenure or whatever, and the prohibited immigrants, again, if they were married or anything like that. Thanks.
Honorable Premier, were you eliciting a question or? No. No. Okay. Okay. Oh. The member for Central Georgetown.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I just want a matter of clarification, and I think we've gone through this before, but I've forgotten. The Premier has said once all the information is gathered, the Ministry will be happy to issue a written report to the member, to the House. So I will get a copy of that report as well. Am I correct? Thank you very much.
The The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. Question number 12.
Elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask question number 12 to the Honourable Minister of Human Resources, Immigration and Community Affairs. Can the Honourable Minister state what the government plans to do to address the concern that some businesses continue to contractually force capable Caymanians to retire at age 60, despite the recent implementation of a normal age of pension entitlement, which is now set at 65?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the answer. The Cayman Islands Labour Law 2011 revision does not prescribe a fixed retirement age. As such, we have seen Caymanian employees who continue to work beyond the age of 60 and in some cases beyond the age of 65. The retirement age of workers, Caymanian or non-Caymanian, is governed primarily by contract law and the contracts that are entered into and agreed to by the employees. Once a properly constituted contract has been entered into, it is legally binding on the respective parties to that contract, and in the absence of a legal requirement, the contract can only be altered if the parties to the contract agree to the change. In the absence of a specific retirement clause in the contract, the employer's policy or handbook for dealing with the retirement of all employees uniformly would provide guidance. The Department of Labor and Pensions routinely requests copies of employment contracts and related handbooks as part of its compliance audits. In the vast majority of documentation reviewed during such audits, employee contracts do not stipulate the age at which employees shall stop working. Such audits have also demonstrated that there are instances wherein Caymanian employees are retained for further periods of employment on fixed-term contracts after the employee has reached the retirement age stipulated in his or her contract. The Department is also aware that there are institutions that are currently updating their personnel contracts to align retirement age with the normal age of pension requirement. The term normal age of pension entitlement was introduced under the National Pensions Amendment Law 2016. Under the new legislation, persons are entitled to access their pension at age 65. Under previous legislation, the age in this respect was 60. The new legislation, however, does not prevent an employee from working beyond the age of 60 or indeed the age of 65. Moreover, the National Pensions Amendment Law 2016 provided employees with the opportunity to access their pensions earlier than the normal age of pension entitlement under certain conditions, including early retirement.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't see anywhere in this answer where the question was answered. We got an explanation of what is happening, but the question was, what does the government plan to do to address the concern?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the answer is very clear. The matter, no one can force a Caymanian to retire, but if the Caymanian has signed a contract with particular terms in it, that is what will govern the labor relationship. The suggestion or the seeming suggestion that somehow we can override contractual provisions is not something I believe the government can do.
The member from Bartontown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important for the listening public that, under our Constitution, Section 16, that we can't discriminate anybody based on age. And while the pension law is there for one thing, I think too much emphasis has been placed on the pension law itself, where people are using that. Now, the real issue, and I'm trying to get into a question, forgive me, the real issue, just to give the backdrop, is really a lot of businesses are running from the increased premiums on health insurance and using that age issue of not wanting to pay the higher pension premium to discriminate against people who can work past 65, 70, and 75, and so forth. So the question, Mr. Speaker, from that standpoint, is what will the government be looking to do in terms of re-educating the public in terms of what their rights are under these situations, but at the same time also address the issue where business is concerned, because it is the health insurance premium that a lot of businesses are running from, where they're really pushing older Caymanians out of the workplace. Thanks.
We'll accept that as comment. Honorable
Mr. Chairman.
Honorable Premier.
The only, I think, important point that I need to make with respect to that is that our Bill of Rights does not apply horizontally but only vertically, i.e. as between the subject or the individual and the government. The Bill of Rights has no application to relationships, employment or otherwise between an individual and any private sector entity or individual. So it doesn't have any application at all.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah, well, the flip side about it is,
West.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, it is also important for the public to realize that we inside this house is charged of making sure that there are laws in place to make sure that even though it may go one way, that people out there aren't basically discriminating against other people also. And I think we have sufficient laws elsewhere, whether it be the immigration law or the labor law. So it's just a matter of us making sure that people still aren't discriminating against our people.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Considering the fact that we recognize that there is no legislation that protects the Bill of Rights horizontally, can the Premier give commitment to whether or not there are suggested plans of making those necessary changes even within the Constitution? And I have one follow-up question after that. Thanks.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't know how to respond to that. The Bill of Rights is the Bill of Rights. There was a huge battle to get the Bill of Rights through. There was huge objection to the Bill of Rights applying more broadly across the full range of relationships. We have, over the course of time, passed local legislation which imposes obligations, creates relationships, and obligations. Examples: the labor law, the labor relations law, the gender equality, a whole range of areas. So I'm not saying it's not possible to do so. I'm simply saying to the member who spoke before, the member from Bordentown West, that the Bill of Rights doesn't apply directly to this particular situation.
You indicated you had a follow-up. Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for the listening audience purposes, can the Premier at least allow or ask his head of labor to give information in respect to, if persons out there have concerns about this, how they go about getting the advice to potentially examine their contracts and give them indications? Because I can see this easily being a problem for a person in respect to the average contract, because the average contract would say at the age of retirement, and at the age of retirement, then, before the law was changed, would have been one age. Does that mean that that contract would say when you're 60, or would it now mean when you're 65? And persons, the average person is not a lawyer, and the amount of money they would have to go get that kind of information.
Question?
The question is, can the Premier say whether the Labor Department is doing advertising to help persons advise them with this problem that we have?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the existence of the Department of Pensions and Labor is widely known, and its services are widely used by a whole range of people in the community who inquire about every possible thing you can consider. I don't think there is any issue about people not being aware that we have a Department of Pensions and Labor which is capable of advising with respect to these matters. It's what they do every day.
The elected member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This is the last supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, sir.
If you have a follow-up, I would love it.
Okay.
I'm just indicating that this is the last.
Oh, I understand what you're saying, sir. The reason why this came up, Mr. Speaker, is because there's one institution I'm aware of that is currently has told 6 employees, when you hit 60, you're out the door. Now, here's the problem. When we debated these pension changes in this honorable House, people got the impression that we were changing the retirement age to 65. That was the understanding, the general public. Exactly, but the understanding that got out amongst the community was that. So we now have people who work for this institution. I know of 6 of them now, who some of them, after Ivan destroyed their homes, refinanced their mortgages, fixed their homes, they are now being retired with mortgages, and they are not going to be able to afford the services. So why I'm asking the government is what they plan to do is we can't just ignore the situation. These individuals are going to end up at NAU, or they're going to end up on the foreclosure list. Something is going to happen. And one solution, and discussing it with the Department of Labor, is maybe we look to change some of the requirements for the business staffing plan, where we incentivize employers by saying, adjust your contracts to 65. Something like that would go a long way in helping these individuals, but they need the help. So would the government consider looking into that solution? It's not my idea. It actually was something I discussed with the Department of Labor and Pension.
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there has never been a retirement age in any legislation in Cayman. So we start from the wrong premise. What we had previously was an age of pension entitlement, which was 60, which my previous administration adjusted upwards to 65. So unless we are going to go down the road where we legislate that employers are forced to keep employees on until age 65, I don't know quite how we can fix that particular situation. I am entirely empathetic to the issue because I know very well that in this day and age, many people, probably including myself, will be paying their mortgage or mortgages well into their 60s, because if you send your children to university overseas, you gotta find the money somewhere about. So, as an example, so I'm very empathetic to the situation, but it is not an easy issue to address, short of, as I say, almost amounting to dictatorial provisions in saying that every employer has to keep employed people up until minimum the age of 65. So, as I say, we're conscious of the issue. It is something we are looking at because we know it has real life implications for many Caymanians. The member is absolutely right. But I can't stand here this afternoon, and give the assurance that this is something we can fix by way of legislation without further work.
The member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, just to clarify, in case the Premier misunderstood what I was saying, is that we don't have to be dictatorial in your approach, but you can offer an incentive. At least that may convince some businesses through the business staffing plan, extend your contracts to 65 to those who are capable, and then they'll get some breaks or benefits or something from the government. No, I'm not saying work permits. Oh, no. But there are other benefits. That's not the only benefit businesses get. Well, my point is, Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to raise this by the individuals affected. So it's not me. I'm not 60 yet. It doesn't affect me yet. but I think that it's a big enough.
Honourable Member, well, you have a very valid matter. Please turn to the question.
Well, I just want some assurance from the government that it won't just be left to sort itself out, and that the government will try to find some solution and offer some assistance in resolving this issue.
Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I gave that assurance earlier, but just let me dispel any notion that dealing with it, the member has not offered any solution. Perhaps that's why they're in the opposition and we in the government, so we have the responsibility to fix it. But going down the road of the business staffing plan is not, I think, necessarily going to provide the answer, because the only thing you get in a business staffing plan is a guarantee of more work permits, which I don't believe that member in particular would be advocating. But we are, as I said, very conscious of the issue, because there are not just those 6, there are many Caymanians who find themselves in this situation, and they find it difficult once they reach 60 to get employment again for reasons, a whole range of reasons, and the member from Bordentown West mentioned one of the key ones is concerns by employers about the impact of hiring a 60-year or 60-plus person on the overall premium, health insurance premiums they have to pay. So we are very conscious of these issues, and we are doing our very best to work through them, but they are by no means easy.
Next question.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands, question number 13.
The Honourable Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question on the order paper number 13. Can the Honourable Minister say when will the assistance with human resources and or finding relating to supervision of primary school children who are dropped off early be addressed and or implemented? I think the wording of this was a bit fine. Yeah, that's that.
We understand, Honourable Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The provided answer. All government primary schools begin their school day at 8:30 a.m. Teachers at these schools are expected to arrive by 8:15 a.m. Schools roster teachers for morning duty and are supplemented by PTA volunteers. The times and arrangements vary across the schools.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if my memory serves me well, through Finance Committee, I asked this question about what the schools would be doing to address the problem of parents having to drop off their kids early because of traffic delays. And I was given the indication, and Mr. Speaker, I apologize, I don't have the Hansards in respect to that exact question, but if my memory serves me well, the indication was given that they were trying to work with various different organizations, like, say, for instance, what's this Christian one called again? YMCA, to deal with the matter. So basically, I guess my question is, Mr. Speaker, is the Minister saying that there's no provisions being put in place to address early arrivals of kids at school when the teachers are not there, to help with supervision, to help parents who have to drop off their kids early, as well in reverse in the evenings, because the problem is also in the evenings when a person gets off at 5, takes an hour and a half to get to the school to pick up their child, which could end up being 6:30, 6:45 in the evenings. And during the winter months, the sun goes down a lot quicker and a child could be there at a primary school in the dark by themselves.
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, far be it for the Minister to say that we were not doing anything. In fact, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the opportunity to so enlighten the Honourable House what the Ministry has at hand. Prospect Primary School. Mr. Speaker, I would beg your indulgence to ask the Honourable Member to not be talking insultive terminologies across the floor, please.
Mr. Speaker, can the Honourable Member say what insulting words have I said? I asked the question, she's about to clarify what the Ministry is doing. Wouldn't it make sense to have had that in her answer in respect to the question, Mr. Speaker?
Ministers answer questions the way they best are able to. Civil servants answer questions, written questions, as best as they're able to. And while we can surmise anything and feel anything, facts are facts. They answer the best that they have information at hand. Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Central Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr.
Do you
Speaker.
have a...
Is it a point of order, Mr. Speaker?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Speaker, it is a point of order. I do thank you for the clarity, and they're allowed to answer however they see wish or feel to do so. But the fact is, the Minister just said that I said insulting words across the floor. Can she say what insulting words have I said, other than the fact of couldn't those answers be given when she gave the first set of answers, as opposed to waiting to clarify what they do when initially that's what I was asking in the first place?
Honourable Member, I think leave it there. The Honourable Minister is explaining the information. That's what's important.
Mr. Speaker, Prospect Primary School, 7 o'clock to 7:15 a.m. No pupils should arrive before 7:30, but security comes on duty at the Prospect Primary School even at this time. 7:30 to 8:15, 2 staff members are on duty. They're stationed on the playground. Gate opens for students in years 1 to 6. Students arrive at school via school bus and dropped off at school, gone to the playground through the side gate. 7:45 a.m. A member of the senior staff team comes on duty. Reception staff on duty in class. Reception students arrive at 7:50 a.m. Parents, guardians must stay with their child if they arrive prior to 7:50. Realize that this is also a social service problem and a parental problem. The doors open for breakfast for children only and is monitored by senior staff. The John A. Cumber Primary School from 7:15 to 8 o'clock. The PTA provides funding for early morning clubs for Key Stage 1 and 2. There are 4 staff members assigned. Creek and Spot Bear Primary School, 8 a.m. Parents are asked not to drop off their children at school before 8 a.m. each day, and usually the parents will wait in their cars until the duty teacher arrives. Early morning duty teachers arrive at the infant and junior sites and gates are unlocked. Students assemble in the lunchroom and are supervised until other teachers arrive by 8:15. East End Primary, 7:30 a.m. Students are met with a teacher on duty at 7:30 a.m. They assemble under the breezeway until the late bus arrives. They are collected by the teachers between 8 and 8:15 a.m. West End Primary School, 8 a.m. Duty teachers arrive and supervise students in the hall until assembly starts at 8:30 a.m. At 8:15, class teachers arrive. They join the students in the hall for assembly. It should be noted that there are approximately 4 to 5 students who arrive prior to 8 a.m. The caretaker who's on the site, a parent herself, assists those students by supervision and watching them on the bench until the duty teacher arrives. Edmund Moyle Primary School, North Side, 6:45 a.m. Security guard opens the gate and supervision is provided by YMCA. 8 to 8:15, assistant teachers and special support aides continue the supervision and conduct devotions. 8:15, students report to class for silent reading and registration. Very organized school. Savannah Primary School, 7 to 7:30 a.m. In addition to one volunteer, the Parent Teacher Association provides funding for 2 persons to supervise early arrivals. These persons arrive at the school. These persons arrive at the school at or before 7 a.m. Students are supervised in the canteen hall and they have breakfast there. 7:30 a.m. Savannah School does what is referred to as the morning mile. It commences. Students who are in the hall go to morning mile. Red Bay Primary School, 7:30 to 8:15. 2 teachers along with 2 other staff members are scheduled to supervise the students under the Cabana area. 8:15 a.m. all teachers are on campus to receive their class. Georgetown Primary School, 7:30 to 8:15. Gates are open. Students go to the hall canteen. The Parent Teachers Association provides a stipend to 3 persons who are responsible for early morning supervision. The deputy and the principal also assist on days when the numbers are high. 8:15 a.m. Staff report to work. By 8:15 a.m. they collect the students. Bordentown Primary School. Before 6:30 a.m. there is no staff on duty at this time to supervise any students that inadvertently appear on the property at that time. Canteen staff are not responsible for the students. Parents are informed of this. However, there are students who arrive at this time and sit in the canteen. 6:30 to 8:15, the Parent Teachers Association provide funding for a parent to provide supervision of the students in the canteen. 6:45 to 8:15, staff are rostered to join the parent with the supervision of the students in the canteen. 1 person each morning. There's a floating staff member who fills in when the staff is unable to do this duty. 8 a.m. The deputy principal collects year 5 and 6 students from the canteen to do extra math with these students in the library. Reception students are often collected by the teachers also at that time. 8:15 a.m. All students remaining in the canteen are collected by staff and their day officially begins. Lighthouse School. 7:15 to 8 a.m. Home School Association provides funding for the supervision of 10 to 11 ASD students. 7:45 a.m. Morning duty with staff in attendance. Currently 2 to 3 students arrive prior to 7:45 and they're monitored by the security guard until the staff take over. John Gray High School, 7 a.m. This is very hard to manage. It was a key function of the pastoral support, which is not in this year's budget, but we're hoping to take a cabinet paper under 11.5 to seek additional funding to reintroduce a pastoral program into the school. Some more security guards are on site, and the principal and our members of the senior management team endeavor to be at the John Gray High School by 7 a.m. Lehman E. Scott Senior High School, Cayman, 7:40 to 8:05. Students arrive via bus or are dropped off at the school and go directly to the canteen area. A member of the senior management is on site. It should be noted that the majority of students arrive on buses between 7:50 and 7:55 a.m. Clifton Hunter High School, 6:30 a.m. There are 6 security officers on campus at 6:30 a.m. There are a small number of students present prior to this time. They sit at the front of the entrance next to the security officer who is on duty. 7:30 a.m. students are allowed to access the compound and the security officers supervise these students. All staff are required to report to the school, and staff briefings are held Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday mornings. Cayman Islands Further Education Center, 7 a.m. There are 3 security officers assigned to arrive by 7 a.m. 1 male officer is responsible for the bus park, 1 female officer for the main gate, another female officer is assigned to the canteen area. Students are expected to go to the canteen area upon early arrival. Member of a senior management team is on campus by 7:15 a.m. All other staff report to work by 7:45 a.m. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you,
the
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
last supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I beg of you and beg this honorable House to allow me to, I have a number of questions I have to ask.
Well, at that point, we're going to take the lunch break, and then when we come back, we'll do these. The House will be suspended until 2:30 p.m. for lunch.